Hello, this is Dr. Teresa Ulrich again. If you haven't had a chance, you might want to go back and look at two short video clippings that I posted previously. One was of baby cowfish eating, and another one was of tiny Hippocampus erectus fry, both groups in the 300-gallon aquarium that I talked about before. You can see that those tiny seahorses are so small that it would be impossible if I wanted to try to raise any to keep them in the same tank with the adults. That's one of the reasons that I wanted to gravitate back toward the dwarf seahorses, because you can keep the newborns and the adults in the same aquarium. I thought I'd show something fun today. I know this is backwards to you, but this is a National Geographic magazine from January of 1959. And I thought it would be fun to look at a little bit about the history of seahorses and how perceptions of them have changed over time and how we've learned so much more. Here is an article called Little Horses of the Sea, and this is focusing on the seahorses in the Florida area. So I thought I'd show some pictures from here. Some people snorkeling, and you can see people, they're pushing giant sieves as they're collecting seahorses. And here's some examples of some dwarf seahorses, a unique picture of them. Here are some people collecting with sieves manually, just standing in place. Here's a really cute picture of some dwarf seahorses hanging onto a pipefish, which is a related animal. And you notice I'm using the word dwarf seahorse instead of pygmy. I know some people use those terms interchangeably, but pygmy actually refers to a species of tiny seahorse that is found in Australian waters. Here's something that I thought was kind of fun. Part of my interest in cowfish are some examples of cowfish. So you can see a man and a woman there. It looks like they're holding maybe an adolescent cowfish there. That looks like that might be a scrawled cowfish from the Florida waters. And then we see one with spots. That might also be a scrawled cowfish. To the right or left, I'm not quite sure what species of boxfish that is. It looks very much like a species that's found in the Pacific water. So that must not be what it is. But it's possible that we have a honeycomb and a scrawled cowfish here, or boxfish. Here showing the popularity of collecting shells off of a beach, a family enjoying themselves outside by the beach. And this next one really breaks my heart. When you look at it, you can see all kinds of curios that were taken from the ocean. With our ecological perspectives these days, some of us would cringe at seeing this, but this was the thinking back then, looking at the unique offerings of the ocean back at that time. Here's another interesting picture. At the top we see that we have people capturing seahorses, and they're keeping them in jars, maybe with some gorgonia in there. And then here at the bottom, we see a man and a woman holding a pair of seahorses that they probably just captured. These are some of my favorite pictures. Here's a really good one. These are dwarf seahorses here, and you can see in one of the seahorses, there's a father there who's got little babies poking out of its pouch. And then here's some other good ones. You can see the babies hanging on to the parents. And here's a really good one of babies coming out of the pouch. You get a nice view in there. some close-up ones with detail. These were phenomenal pictures back in the day, but you can see the tail of one baby coming out of that papa. And there's some babies working their way out of this papa. Here's another one. We have a baby hanging onto its papa's tail. And then here we have the line seahorse or the giant seahorse, or scientifically Hippocampus erectus. Those are the larger seahorses that are most commonly available on the market today. And you look here, you can see that at one time you could go into shops and just buy live seahorses. I know it's in reverse, but that's what it says. And it actually says Seahorse Curio Shop. So unfortunately, they probably have a lot of seahorse skeletons in there too. This is probably inside of that seahorse shop, showing how a hydrometer works to measure the salt level. Here are some larger lined seahorses. And that's really all I wanted to show out of this one. It was kind of fun to see back even in 1959 that people had interest and curiosity in seahorses. I have some older books that I think are kind of fun too. This book is from 1961. Again, it's in reverse, but it says Keeping Seahorses. And it is supposed to be a manual on caring for seahorses at the time. But I wanted to show you, look at how crude some of the habitats were back then. So at the top it looks like it might be a fish tank that we might be more accustomed to using, but here they're just using a fish bowl for those dwarf seahorses and maybe an airline tubing. Here, black and white, we can see a group of dwarf seahorses, kept in captivity, of course. And here is another really nice picture of the seahorses hanging onto, I guess we would call it a seahorse tree. I don't know what the technical name for it is. Probably was a former gorgonia, and it's just the skeleton that they have in a tank. And here at the bottom, we can see large clusters of seahorses together in a home aquarium. And then here is another seahorse tree with some dwarf adults at the bottom and the babies at the top. And here is an example of how both adults and babies can be kept in the same aquarium. I did want to read a short passage to you. I don't know if we would agree with this statement today, but back at this time in the early 60s, this says, how many seahorses may be kept in a 10-gallon aquarium? Up to several hundred may be kept in the tank at one time if conditions are proper and there are sufficient plants or seed trees so that the horses will have enough resting places. That's a pretty high density stock. I don't know if we would follow those parameters now to keep healthy tank conditions. Here's a picture of a pair of dwarfs mating. And then look what we have again. They call these little black dots here, not a very good picture, Boston beans, but these were just little tiny cowfish or trunkfish or boxfish. And these are the same little babies that I showed you in an earlier clip, exactly what the little cowfish looked like. Again, a different species probably, because my cowfish is an Indo-Pacific species where these are Atlantic. But you can see there is a connection between seahorses and cowfish even in the literature of the past. And then I thought I would show a couple of other fun things to reflect the history of seahorses in our lives. Again, this is backwards, but I'm going to read it to you. In the back of magazines that children used to buy, for example, I think one was called Boy's Life, another Young Miss. There used to be these little tiny ads where you could buy seahorses And it was a very reasonable price. In fact, I remember even my father buying one for me when I was a little girl, and it was fun having this little tiny seahorse. This particular ad says 3 pet seahorses, $2 and free hitching post. Order selected fresh caught live seahorses sent airmail from Florida. Orders receive a kit with free food, hitching posts, and simple instructions for raising these exotic little pets in a jar or fishbowl. The father gives birth to the young colts alive. All the family will enjoy hours of fun with this relaxing and educational hobby. Guaranteed live delivery, USA. Hardy, easy to raise. 2 seahorses and 1 free, only $2. 3 pair special, $3.50. Order 2 pair and receive 1 pair free. 1 address, no COD. FF Marine Life since 1960. P.O. Box 248 NC 68, Dania, Florida 33004. There were a couple of different companies back at that time that posted ads, and I think they were appearing into the 70s and 80s. This one's a little bit cut off, but this is just another example that I printed out. I don't believe any of these companies are in existence anymore, just because of the different trends that seahorses went through, being put on protective species lists and having to go through special licensure for a time to acquire these licenses, special protocols to acquire these special licenses so that vendors could sell seahorses. And I think to a degree too, because of our environment and the demands, that seahorse populations dwindled and they weren't as profitable as they once were. I also thought it would be fun to show some other old books that I had from somebody who was an expert in her time. I think these were from 1969. They're both from Mildred Bellamy. These books are both pretty similar. Again, they're backwards. This one says Seahorses in Your Home, and this one says Encyclopedia of Seahorses. If you can see, the word seahorse is written out in 2 words here, and this is the linguist in me, but you'll notice that a lot of compound words that we have go through a period of transition. At one point, they were 2 separate words, and then because the 2 words became more commonly associated and linked, you'll see at times in later literature that these 2 words were hyphenated, and now in modern literature, you just see it as one word, seahorse. So just a little tidbit there for anybody who's interested. What I find interesting about both of these, they're supposed to be comprehensive manuals or information about seahorses, but neither one really talks very much about dwarves, which were obviously pretty common at one point. Pardon that barking, that's my dog. Here we can see examples again of how vendors used to capture their seahorses to sell. And then here I found one sentence in this Encyclopedia of Seahorses about the Dwarf Seahorse. Together with Hippocampus zosteray, Hudsonius and Punctualis are the best known of the western seahorses. And I don't know what Punctualis is, but I think that might be an old name or an old version for what we now call Hippocampus erectus. Again, seahorse as well as other animal nomenclature has changed over the years, and they found that seahorses that they named as separate species were actually the same one with different variations, and so they corrected those terms over time. Again, I thought it would be fun to look at some of the crude aquarium materials that were used. This is an old filter system, and it was run with a pump, and inside is what we called floss. And I know now we say carbon, but at the bottom we would have said that was charcoal. I'm showing my age here, I know. And then we believed in using what we called under gravel filters, and these sat at the bottom of an aquarium. You would put substrate on top of them, and the idea was that the water flowing through these, being pulled through by a pump, an air pump of some sort, would create the beneficial nitrifying bacteria to keep the tank stable. This is something that I found really interesting. I've never seen anything else about this. Again, I'm sorry that it's backward. It talks about vocal ability, and I'm just going to read the first paragraph. Seahorses can and frequently do add to the general underwater hubbub of sound that goes on continuously in the not-so-silent sea. Often they will produce sounds for 6 or 8 months after removal from the native habitat. So this is leaving the impression that the seahorses actually experience some sort of emotional reaction to being pulled out of the ocean and emitted some sort of sounds to express their lamenting for their home. Again, here is a list of people back in the day and their experiences with how long they were able to keep seahorses in captivity, what the lifespan tended to be. And I have here for the Dwarf Seahorse, the recorded length of time maximum at that point was 9 months. Now we believe that dwarves can live from birth to 1 to 2 years in captivity, depending on factors such as water quality and feeding regime, things like that. This is a smaller version by the same author, maybe more of an instruction manual for the home aquarist, where the other one was maybe more of a primer, getting to know more about the history and requirements of seahorses as well as unique abilities. And again, I really did not find much information about dwarf seahorses, even though they're supposed to be one of the most common at this time even. And it's even just a half of a sentence that it's mentioned. Here it does mention Hippocampus erectus, and it says the species best known in the United States and in some foreign countries are the spotted seahorse, Hippocampus erectus, and now we commonly refer to the Hippocampus erectus as the line seahorse, and the dwarf seahorse, Hippocampus zosterae. Again, for some reason, it's not showing up a lot in the literature. So anyway, I thought it would be fun to share some of the artifacts that I had that represent a little bit of the history of seahorses. Obviously, a lot has changed since people started acquiring and keeping seahorses several decades ago, and we'll talk a little bit more about what are some of the best practices in upcoming videos. Thanks so much for watching today. Hope you learned a few things, and I look forward to seeing you next time.